So in the event you miss it or have to log off, don't worry. Tomorrow you will get a copy of this, as will anyone else who registered for the webinar. So here's some of our stories. This is me here on the left, Paul Cronin, and then Jack Beauregard there on the right. And as you can see, we represent the alpha and the omega of the baby boom generation. We've been at this a little while. We both had corporate careers. Interestingly enough, we were both in sales. Although I was in the resale wholesale trade, where Jack was in the orthopedics. He sold hips and knees to all the various healthcare providers and hospitals. How we came together is a real funny story, frankly. I had sold a stake in a business in 2008 and left that and promptly lost my identity. It was a great day in the event that I left, and I celebrated on a beach, sort of watching the sunset from my favorite beach on Cape Cod. And I got a beer in my hand and my phone buzzes, and I look down at the phone and I listen to the voicemail, and it's from Greg, a friend of mine in the old business. So Greg says, "Hey Paul, we're just calling to wish you congratulations. Sorry you're leaving, but we're glad everything worked out well for you, and just have one question: what are you going to do next?" And kind of looked down at the phone, and I swore and said, "Gee, thanks, Greg. You just killed my buzz." But it was a great question to ask. This was in June of 2008, right before the financial crash, and as it was really good timing. I really didn't know what I was going to do next. I had a couple of ideas. As it so happened, an old friend, my first boss from the old retail wholesale world, had called me and asked me to do a little consulting gig, but I knew it wasn't going to last too long. So I decided to go visit an organization called the Exit Planning Exchange, and I sat down next to this distinguished gentleman. And Jack asked me a question. He said, "Well, Paul, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I help companies grow faster. I'm a sales and marketing guy. Is that something you're interested in?" And he said, "Well, maybe." And I said, "Well, what do you do, Jack?" He said, "You know how people get to a point in life where maybe they sell their company or they choose to leave their business, but they have really no idea what they're going to do next?" And I kind of laughed to myself. "Yeah, you mean like people like me? Going to have an out-of-body experience." And he said, "Well, I have a process to fix that." I said, "Well, that's interesting. Why don't we exchange cards and meet for coffee?" So we kept meeting for coffee, and over the course of a year, we developed, an understanding of each other, our somewhat similar backgrounds, even though we have a big age difference. And he had suffered some tragedies in his life that led him to this field. Before that, he was in orthopedics and has started a very successful company. And as part of that whole journey of his story, he ultimately ended up at the Harvard Divinity School, where he started studying the world's religions, not to be a spiritual leader of any kind, but really just to sort of understand. And he was very fortunate because his wife ended up dying quite young, left him as a single dad. And that whole experience of what he was going through, what he was doing, his research at the Harvard Divinity School, really led him to create sort of a philosophy of how one lives, which is now put together in 3 different books that he's written. The most recent one being 7 Principles for Living with Authenticity. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But we decided to come together, and we created Successful Transition Planning Institute. I joined him, and then we have slowly built a whole lot of programs and assessments and so forth along the way. So onward we go. Now, if you look at the arc of human history globally, most people, human beings that is, have only lived 30 to 40 years. It took until the mid of the 20th century for average life expectancy to reach 50 years. Today, globally, human life expectancy is around 60 to 70 years. In rich countries such as the United States, 70 to 80 years. And in rich countries with really good diets, such as Japan, over 80 years. So the question is, where does this all fit, and how does it relate to this thing called retirement, which many people are sort of supposed to retire when you get into your 60s, right? Our pension systems were built around there, for good or for not. Financial advisors on the called today maybe smiling and saying probably for not. Regardless, that was sort of this interesting paradigm, which is really antithetical to the rest of human history. So how does it all work? I'd like to share 3 retirement stories. Jane worked in a retail store for a number of years after the kids were grown. She liked to get out of the house, make a little money, and socialize with coworkers. When her husband retired after 40 years with the company, he started to nag her to quit working so they could travel, see the grandkids, and so she quit. They did some travel and had some fun with the grandkids until her husband got cancer. 4 years later, he was dead. A little while after his death, I asked how she was doing. Her reply startled me. I wish I'd never quit that job, and now I'm too old to go back. Let me tell you, Paul, this retirement is for the birds. I recently worked with a client I'll call Sue. She had been working since she was 19 years old. Work was important to her. Sue was now 60 and had just retired from a small college. She was busy for a while helping with wedding plans for her youngest child and volunteering 1 day a week. Her husband was 70, a part-time consultant and adjunct college instructor. Sue told me he gets up each day with a plan and he is out the door. I get up in the morning with a few things to do, and the next thing I know, it's 3 p.m. and I think, I didn't do much today. In 2003, we bought a second home on Cape Cod. The previous owner had also used it as a second home. On a visit prior to the closing, I met Fred, a man in his 70s, who was the father of the previous owner. He had retired from a career as an engineer. Fred moved to Cape Cod and became the caretaker of his son's second home. He talked with great pride of the work he did to maintain the home, the flowers, the lawn, and such. He then looked at me and said, when you're retired, every day is like Sunday afternoon. This place has kept me busy. After you buy this place, Paul, I guess I'll be losing my job. Ouch, I said to myself. That was not what I was expecting. So, what's happening here? Well, one of the things to think about is a study that was done at the U.S. Department of Labor in 2015, and they asked people aged 45 plus to track in minutes per day for a whole variety of activities. I summarized them here as essentially about 8 hours of work, 7 hours of sleep, and 9 hours for everything else for people who were working in this bracket survey. But for those who were retired, it increased about 8 hours of sleep, which personally I'm kind of excited about getting some extra sleep if I ever get to retire. And about 10 hours for all this other stuff, but 6 hours of TV and movies. So when you think of the math here, money people are replacing work with screen time, movies, computers, what have you. And I think to myself when I saw this and said, yuck, not for me. That prompted me to write a blog a little while ago called Is Retirement a Big Fat Lie? And what I mean by that is this is the false dichotomy, right? Here's Sisyphus, right? Pushing the rock up the hill. This represents work for many people. You get up on Monday, the rock's down here, you push it up the hill, it gets to Friday, and hallelujah, it's the weekend. And then you wake up Monday morning, where are you? At the bottom of the hill, pushing the rock. And the only alternative in our society has traditionally been, well, you sail off into the sunset, right? Until, of course, you fall off the face of the earth. And you're not needed anymore. And some people look at that and go, forget it. I'm just going to keep working. I don't want to be irrelevant. I don't want to fall off the face of the earth. And this is particularly so for business owners. But a lot of other folks who very much identify themselves with their work can fall into this same false dichotomy. And the challenge is, how do we develop a third alternative? Well, one way is to think of this as a journey. And one step is to explore your life in order to shape your future. Now, all of us most likely had a journey today. We got up, we got going, we had to end up in an appointment or an office or whatever the case may be. In a journey, you know where you're beginning and you know where you're going to end. And with GPS today, you don't even have to think about the directions. You get turn by turn, right? So it's a sequence of events that everyone's accustomed to. But a retirement transition, is a different kind of journey. You see, you're actually starting with the ending. Your career is ending. Perhaps you're selling your business. And you know you need to create a new beginning. And you might have a couple of ideas, but sometimes you're not really sure. Sometimes you don't have any good ideas at all. Sometimes instead of you planning on retired, you've been asked to retire. Well, all of this can cause anxiety. Purpose is another interesting concept. A number of us typically get a lot of purpose from work, and if we are leaving our businesses, leaving our careers, what are we going to do about that? Of course, some people say, well, I don't care, I'm just going to retire. Why do I need to think about that? Well, here's a number. The University of Wisconsin had done a study a little while ago, and they did a longitudinal study over 14 years, midlife in America. And they asked a whole series of questions. And the questions ultimately evolved into this. Do you feel you're living with a sense of purpose in your life and you have positive relations? And what they found at the end of the study is people who consistently said they were living with a sense of purpose in their life and they had multiple positive relations. Well, most of those people were alive. But the people who said at some point started living without a sense of purpose or with less of a sense of purpose and didn't have many positive relations, most of those people were dead. So if you want to ever ask why you, or for those of you who are advisors talking to your clients, think, why do I need purpose? Because having a sense of purpose in your life and positive relations can actually save your life. Of course, we're not the only people speaking about this. I'll let you read the screen there, but I'd like to share one story from Lee Iacocca, who's a retired CEO of Chrysler. He very famously had rescued it in the early 1980s. Well, before Iacocca was at Chrysler, he was head of Ford. In fact, he was responsible for the launch of the Mustang, which was the most successful launch of any new car in American history. Well, shortly after that big success, he reportedly, and this was his story, was called in to Mr. Ford, the chairman of the company, to his office. Lee said, okay, Mr. Ford, I'm here. And Ford promptly said to him, Lee, you're fired. Iacocca was floored. He had no idea, no expectation this was going to happen. He said, how could you fire me? What's wrong? Well, Mr. Ford replied, because I just don't like you. Now, the skinny on that behind it is what Iacocca suspected. Mr. Ford had a huge ego, and he didn't like the fact that somebody who worked for him was getting all this praise. So sometimes you can plan everything in life, and then the roof can fall in on you anyway. And the challenge is, are you going to keep yourself prepared for that eventuality, or are you going to end up with kind of a handkerchief approach? So there are a number of ways people don't transition well. We're going to list sort of the top 3 in our experience. There's the R&D method. I'll just see what happens. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to plan. And then, of course, there's the hyper-focus on the one thing. So here are some visuals with this. So if you're feeling, well, I don't want to think about it, that's the repress and deny method, or R&D as we call it. If you don't see or think or hear or speak about leaving your business or retiring someday, it'll just never happen, which is, of course, ridiculous. And then there's the folks who don't like to plan. All right, I'll just take a leap, like this fella did. Right? Well, if you're going to take a leap, wouldn't it be better to leave with a parachute than a handkerchief. I think this guy might have chosen a parachute. Then there's the people who want to just keep going. All right? You ever heard the expression, well, I'm going to die at my desk. Oh, she's going to go out boots first. Well, here's a visual for you. Whoop. Oh, I'm off. My apologies. The other one is that guy. That guy is a person who hyper-focuses on the one thing. And this is a story that was shared to me by my partner. He was at a reunion, and all of his fraternity brothers were with him and their spouses. And they were all sharing stories about being retired, what they're working on. And this one fellow who had apparently a very successful career couldn't stop talking about his lawn. My partner kind of joked, this must have been the finest lawn in the state of XYZ. Because it's what seemed like hours. Talked about how he cared for it and this and that. And it kind of made me thought of this story of one CEO who said to me, he said, Paul, I knew that when I retired, there might be times when I got bored. But I sure as hell don't want to become boring. You don't want to become that guy. This could be golf, grandchildren, gardening, you name it. It may be interesting to you, but nobody wants to hear about it endlessly. They might, in fact, want to hear about more interesting things that you're doing. But if you hyper-focus on one thing, you may not have a lot more to share. So what is this whole concept of the golden years? Well, the golden years, most people now think, well, it's always been part of the lexicon, all right? Well, remember that slide earlier about human life history? Well, most people didn't live that long, all right? In fact, some people would say that our retirement system were created as sort of a game. Most people paid into it and very few collected. Well, the history of the term golden years is a 20th century invention. It was created by a man named Del Webb. Del was one of the original developers of retirement communities. Now, we all know what a retirement community is. But in the 1950s, people were building houses in Arizona and the swamps of Florida, all right, Del Webb being one of them, and they were trying to sell you, this is where you want to live. But the people didn't understand why they would want to do that, all right? So he had to create a lifestyle called the golden years, trademarked it, all right? You're in a rocking chair, or you're taking it easy on a hammock, or so on and so forth. Then they slowly added, golf and shuffleboard and everything else that we think about there. And that's all well and good. And, many of our parents and grandparents, that was fantastic, right? They had these really hard lives. They, survived the war. They survived the Depression. The whole idea of just, having a few years to relax and not do much. Fantastic. But think of our generation today. Think of that slide earlier, human life history. Right? We're living decades upon decades longer than we did, even just 50 to 100 years ago. Well, the golden years for a lot of people, sitting in a rocking chair, once again, yuck. Well, many people then say, well, I can't think of anything else. I'm just going to be one of those people who dies at his desk. And the visual I will now share with you that I'd like you to share and think about is this guy. This guy thought that way too. All right. Nice desk, nice chair. Seems like a nice tie. But really, folks, isn't it sort of ridiculous? And the question I challenge people with, whether you're an advisor on the call today or yourself, is ask yourself or ask your clients this question. Is dying at your desk the best that you can do with the rest of your life? And I'll repeat that so you can write it down. Is dying at your desk the best that you can do with the rest of your life? I sure hope not. So here are some other numbers. This was a study done a little while ago, and they asked people who had reported the study, have you not saved enough, or have you saved enough for retirement? 70% they had not saved enough. And so as a result of that, they said, well, I guess I'll have to keep working. They asked the sort of the planned retirement age, and the average of the study was age 63, which sounds about right to me. I'm not a statistician, but it just feels right. Now, within that, 45% agreed, I guess I'm going to keep working. But if you start looking at the age bracket, you find that the younger age, only 51%, well, I guess I'll keep working. as people were getting over the age of 60, more of them said, yeah, I guess I'll keep working. All right. And that pointed to, one of the main challenges is that many people haven't saved enough and they feel they're going to have to keep working, but they may not have the choice, or conversely, they haven't really thought more broadly about what other kind of work they can do other than what they've always done. And then they're running into something else, which is called the other biological clock, all right, age 75. And this is what came to me from a gentleman who spent many, many years in the life insurance industry. And he said to me, most people who are reasonably healthy can be reasonably healthy for a while. And then at about age 75, people tend to start sort of getting sick and breaking down. And if you think about parents or friends, people who are a little older than you, yeah, you can remember people hitting into their mid-70s, late 70s, and all of a sudden, things happening. Right? My mother ended up getting Parkinson's. She lived quite a while with it, but physically, she was much more limited. And so you've got this challenge of, I want to stay active, or I need to keep working, and you've got this other clock out there. And the question we ask is, how do you make this all work? Other challenges that come up with not planning well or not really thinking through what your next chapter might be, or if you want to call it retirement, are what you see here. In many cases, you've got a husband who's a little older. He's someone who may have been, his career was very much dominant in what he focused on in his life. And now all of a sudden he's home. All right. All of a sudden he's saying to his wife, well, you need me to do anything? I can go to the market. You going somewhere today? I can drive you. All right. Our nickname for this is Velcro husbands. And I witnessed this in my own family. It's crazy. Crazy also can be the spouses who all of a sudden have somebody around all the time. I remember a cousin meeting me one time at a wedding, and her husband had retired very young. And we're having a nice conversation. All of a sudden, out of the corner of her eyes, she sees her husband walking over, sort of smiling, and she looks at me and goes, oh, God, here he comes again. So another story I like to say is, you're married for better, for worse, but not for lunch. Well, that came to me from a story I read about Tip O'Neill, was a famous Speaker of the House of Representatives in the U.S. And he retired, came home, and his wife supposedly promptly sat him down and said, Pip, I haven't made you lunch in 40 years, and I'm not about to start now. Get yourself an office. And he promptly did, mostly for the purpose of getting out her hair and having lunch someplace else. Sadly, addiction and dependencies are rapidly growing in our generation. There are lots of kinds of widows. The traditional we all know about, but there's golfers' widows, fishers' widows, gardening widows, you name it, runners' widows. And what it really comes down to is, that guy or that woman, they hyper focus on the one thing. And there was one couple where the guy discovered running when in his late 50s, and he really became completely enamored. So just about every weekend he's running, 10Ks and 5Ks and marathons and half marathons. His wife said to me, he said, we used to be married, now I'm just the support team. And she kind of feels like she didn't sign up for that, but what's she going to do? Well, that causes a lot of stress. MLS, in our case, stands for Married Living Separately. It's not unusual for couples who, husbands typically a little older. They may retire a little sooner. They may move to that, retirement community, or perhaps downsize to someplace else. Well, one person's still working. They either need to or want to, saving more money, what have you. And unfortunately, what can happen is the distance cannot make the heart grow stronger. And in fact, can end up in gray divorce, as in the color of one's hair. This is a study released by the Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and they were studying divorce rates. And what they found kind of startled them. They said, long-term marriages, generally people age 50 plus, the divorce rates had doubled. Right? In 1990, people age 50 plus made up about 10% of all divorces. By 2009, over 25% had reached there. And the projection of the researchers were that by 2030, somewhere between 30 and 35% of all divorces were going to be for people age 50 plus. In other words, long-term marriages are falling apart. And our belief is because couples aren't spending the time, all right, to create a common set of outlooks and values, all right, to reinvigorate the relationship. So when you think about it, you've got these couple of choices, right? This traditional, the golden years, or, grinding away, dying at your desk, pushing the rock up the hill. And the challenge is there a third way? Particularly our generation, right? Let's face it. The baby boomers reinvented everything they've touched. Art, music, culture, education, so on and so forth. It only makes sense that we're going to reinvent this new time of life, which in the course of human history is really a relatively new thing. So what we challenge people is a new way of thinking. Now, some people see this slide and they go, "Oh yeah, if I say the glass is half full, then I'm an optimist, or if I say if it's half empty, I'm a pessimist." And we actually trick you a little bit. You see, the glass is perfect. It's perfectly half full of air and perfectly half full of wine. See, the new way of thinking is keeping it in balance. It's not the false dichotomy, but it creates imagination, it creates brainstorming, it creates planning. So, this is a preparedness chart we ask people to look through, and how you need to think about how you keep yourself psychologically prepared, dealing with one's fears about a transition, deal with emotional challenges that are involved in a major transition, getting yourself intellectually prepared, all right, spiritually prepared to a certain degree, and then ultimately lifestyle, all right, which is how you're going to figure out who you really are, and then implement that of who you really are in a way of keeping yourself busy with activities that really reinforce who you want to be and what you want to do in your life for this day forward. We ask people to go through, make a lot of decisions, and so we have a 7-step process that we teach people. And as you can see here, it's about expanding the thinking, viewing yourself holistically, more of a balanced approach, creating a spectrum of options, using a whole system approach, the ups and the downs, pros and cons, as it were, going deeper to see how you really feel, doing scenario planning, and then ultimately, most importantly, taking meaningful action, because all the plans in the world that are never implemented don't really help you achieve your goals either. These are a couple exercises that we often do in some of our workshops, and I'll share them with you today if you want to do this, but this is a very useful way. You ask a whole series of questions that start with this. Outside of work, what do I enjoy doing? Outside of work, what gives my life meaning? Outside of work, what do I honor and respect myself for? And the goal here is really to start helping you intellectually, emotionally separate your identity from this work persona. Whether you're the business owner, the doctor, the lawyer, whatever you are, all right? That's ultimately how you've paid the bills for the last 20, 30, 40 years. But that isn't necessarily who you are as a person. It may not be the person you want to continue to be. So you got to dig a little bit into that. Something else is called a life transitions exercise, where you think about a major life transition that occurred. Could be when you graduated school, became when you got married, become when you maybe started a career or started a business or left a business. So think about a whole series of events, and about your age or about the year it happened, doesn't whichever one makes sense. But most importantly, you want to think about the lessons you learned. All right? One of the funniest experience I had in a workshop one time, I asked this, and I asked people to, they wrote down a whole bunch of these, and I said, all right, anyone want to give me a couple answers? So I got some interesting things about, I started a business, I learned about this, and then one person said, well, let me tell you what I really learned when I was age 52, and my wife asked for a divorce. And the lesson I learned is, had I known she was going to ask me for a divorce when I turned 52, I would have been a lot nicer to her earlier in our marriage. Of course, the entire room just exploded in laughter. I thought it was fabulous. A framework for purposeful living. So this is sort of a tangible way for all of these ideas people have in their head about what they're going to do, all right, who they're going to be, and you put it all together, all right? So you want to keep yourself as physically healthy for as long as you can, right? Because most of us, if you're in your 50s or 60s, most people who tune into my sessions here are 50s, 60s, or 70s, they say, hey, I hope to live another 20, 30 years or so. I'd like them to be healthy years, so you have to think, what are you going to do on a regular basis to keep yourself healthy? Right? We help people brainstorm ideas and measure what makes sense, pros and cons. You also have to keep your brain engaged, all right? Particularly if you're going to be leaving work, and most of us get a lot of intellectual stimulation from work. If we don't do that on a daily basis, crosswords and Sudoku are not going to cut it, all right? You got to think about ideas, courses, lectures, books you can read, and so forth. Lots of ways to keep the brain engaged. You also have to think about, recreational, sort of the traditional, golf, gardening, sailing, what have you. But then we challenge people to think about art, music, dance, poetry. There are many ways to use that other half of your brain that can yield really meaningful activities in your life. If you have a spouse or partner, you need to think through, what activities you're going to do. You want to maintain that connection. You don't want to end up with a great divorce. If you don't have a spouse or partner, it's something you might aspire to. It's important to think about the values that are important to you. And then as you go out into the world and you're meeting lots of different people, you need to start assessing, geez, does this person share some of the values that I have, or enough of the core values I have? Is this something I want to have a relationship or a longer-term relationship with? All of us come from some sort of family. Many of us make our own families. We want to make sure that we are creating some activities where we have regular contact with people. Because when you have regular contact with people, all right, it ties you together. All right. For those of us who have cared for aging parents and ultimately buried them, all right, we know how important that is. I know how important my relationship with my mother was and where she was aging, and my brother, and our relationship in working and helping her in that process. All right. So we're all getting older. And like it or not, we're probably going to need other people to help us when we get to a certain point. Well, family's the most likely people who will. So either you have a traditional family or one of these modern sort of families, all right? It's important to create connections, and activities is one of the great ways to do that. You have to figure out where you're going to live. I mean, this is actually something my wife and I are going through. We've been talking about downsizing, upsizing, right-sizing, all right? And we've finally gotten serious about it, all right? Many people want to save money. They want to live in a warm climate, or maybe they love to ski. They want to live in a cold climate. Whatever that case may be, you got to think deeply about that. And you got to have, particularly if you're in a relationship with somebody, like a marriage, you really need to think deeply, all right, and understand all the pros and cons of any choice you make. Most of us get, as many as 80% of our social connections through work. You leave work, you sell your business, say goodbye to 80% of your connections. And while, things like social media are helpful, all right, you can definitely create some connections there. It's just not the same thing as meeting friends for drinks after dinner, right? Meeting someone for coffee. And if you're not in a regular work environment, it's actually kind of hard to do that. This is a time of life when many people start thinking about spirituality, their connection to this greater universe. Other people have faith traditions, and they may return to them, or they may want to deepen their faith tradition. And we don't preach any particular faith tradition, or any faith tradition for that matter. But really ask people to think about, what is this connection you have to the universe? Sort of who am I deep inside? And in many ways, I think if you don't do this, you're kind of shortchanging yourself. Because my personal belief is, we're the only beings on earth that we're aware of that's self-aware enough to think about our connection. Kind of separates us from the other critters, so why not give yourself that gift of experiencing that? And the last area we like to talk to people is about work, and we break that into the traditional volunteer philanthropic type of work that people expect to do at this stage of life. And income-producing work, which is a very purposefully chosen phrase. So what we're asking people to do is, you may have volunteered when you're younger. Again, in my personal experience, I volunteered quite a bit when my kids were younger in their various youth activities. When my kids were in their 20s, the youth activities they do today, they probably don't want dad around for. So I really had to think hard about where I want to invest my time and my money to have an impact that honors the values that I'm creating in my life. And I believe everyone else needs to think about that too. You have to be careful though, because I have a very good friend whose wife retired from a big corporate job, and she couldn't wait to start retiring. And I went golfing with one time and says, hey, how's things going with your wife, being retired? And he had already been retired before. He goes, Paul, all she does is volunteer, right? She volunteers more hours than she used to work, all right? He was not happy about that, right? So you can actually kind of go overboard. So income producing work could be something on a smaller role of what you've done in the past, your current career, or something for another company in a role that doesn't require it becoming a grind. It could be a part-time job, doing something else. It could be a consultancy. It could be a small business. It could be some combination of those, right? In this case, the overriding objective, okay, is to produce some income, because every amount of income that you earn at this phase of life is a little less income you need to draw from your retirement funds. Remember that slide earlier? I haven't saved enough for retirement, so I guess I'll have to keep working. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to keep working full time. Hopefully, it doesn't mean you have to keep doing something with some soul-crushing work. But if you're working in this framework, it is more likely than not that you will come up with new ideas that can help you produce income beyond what you can imagine today. So here's a quick recap of some programs. We have a couple programs of self-reflection. You can purchase them online. Exploring Your Life, Shaping Your Future is for what we call the career folks. And then there's What's Next Self-Assessment is business owners only. We have several workshops. We have half-day workshops, one-day workshops, some for career folks, other for business owners only, and then Living with Purpose is a much longer workshop, and usually over 1 or 2 days, that is for anybody. Some people don't like workshops. I get that. So we have private coaching, which are typically 2 to 3 sessions for explore or what's next, and then longer sessions that may go 90 minutes at a time, where you're going over a number of weeks or months in some cases, what we call live, think, and decide. And all of these are available on our website, which is theplatinumyears.com, under the programs tab. The self-directed programs, or programs of self-reflection, we have one for career folks, all right, Exploring Your Life, Shaping Your Future, and What's Next Self-Assessment, and this is for business owners. In each case, what you get is an online assessment, there's a book, there's a white paper, and then there's a self-discovery guidebook where you can start digging into some of these questions that I mentioned earlier in terms of thinking about yourself outside of work, what are some of your transition goals, if you have a business, what are some of your business transition goals, what are some outcome goals, and then start defining what you're doing in this framework that we call and how you feel about that. Can you do better in other areas? And as I like to say, the point of these programs of self-reflection in many ways is to break the most powerful force in nature, inertia, right? I'll get to that someday. Well, someday is today, so get started. These are very inexpensive. They're $99, and they're available on our website. Another way to start is Jack's newest book, 7 Principles for Living with Authenticity, Discovering Your True Self When Facing Life Change. It's available on Amazon. You can order it through your local bookstore if you prefer. It'd be wonderful if they had it in stock, but it's relatively new, so probably not yet. You can also download Chapter 1 from our homepage on the Platinum Years. And this book, while it certainly deals with people in this age bracket, in many ways, this is for someone who's dealing with any kind of a major change at any stage of life. It could be dealing with divorce. It could be dealing with job loss, career, the empty nest, death of a spouse, and what have you, selling a business, obviously. So all of that can be a means for people to use this book to start working through. And we also make available, I should say, a study guide, that goes with the book. You just need to email us for that. So the last slide I want to share today is really what I call the 3 paths forward. All right, and this slide the smooth path to the left represents that traditional retirement, the golden years. You kind of know what's coming. You've seen it all before. Not particularly exciting, but at least you know where you're headed. Now, for those who reject that, the road to the right is the rutted road to dying at your desk. You also kind of know where that ends and what that ride's going to be like. The ride I'm hoping, the path I'm asking you to choose, is this middle path where you can't quite see where it's going, all right? But this is the path to the platinum years, which if you're willing to do the work, all right, could in fact be the 10, 20, or even 30 years, all right, of the most interesting, meaningful, and perhaps even exciting years of your life. So this is how to reach us, all right? My information, Jack's, is in our office there. And so if you have any questions, this is a great time to click the question, the little plus sign next to the question box there. Let's see what we've got in the box. Where can I get started? Well, that's a great question. I guess I didn't do a good job answering. Well, the first place I suggest, obviously you can buy the book. That's available on Amazon, or you can also get it through our website under resources, and then we have a little bookstore under resources. I definitely strongly encourage people who are just getting started in this process, you're continuing to work, take a look at the programs of self-reflection. What's next for the business owners on the call today and everyone else, the Explore program. If you belong to a company or an association and you think there are others in your organization that might want to participate in a workshop, we're very happy to put those on for companies. We recently did it for a very, very large company out of Tennessee, and the participants were very, very happy with that. So we worked with the company to put that on. We have a group of individual consultants across the country, and actually we've got them in 5 countries that do this kind of work. Each one of those delivers their own programs, sort of in their own format, but we have a training program and teach them how to do all that. What other questions do we have here? Where else can I buy the book? So we can buy the book, as I said, Amazon. This is 7 Principles, which is for anyone. Jack's previous book is Finding a New Owner. That's for your business, for your life, and that's really just for business owners. What are some of the private coaching programs? These private coaching programs, Explore Coaching is essentially a private coaching version of the Explore Workshop, which is the workshop version of Program Self-Reflection. So it's fundamentally the same material, the difference being that in a coaching environment, you're having somebody who will give you feedback. It can perhaps help you make connections to other professionals you might need. And ultimately, as in all coaching experiences, it's really about keeping you accountable, all right? Breaking through that inertia, making the choices that you need to make to move forward. What's Next coaching is much the same way, but that's strictly for business owners. There's so many more complications when you're leaving a company, and so therefore you have to think about all those. There's a couple of coaching sessions that are about 90 minutes long. There's a couple of assessments. There's some homework. If you are in a committed relationship, you're probably going to spend some time talking to your spouse or partner about that. LIVE stands for 7 strategic steps for creating a more purposeful future, and it's really about how are you going to live. And if you remember that framework, if I can sort of scroll back here, the LIVE program, which is also the Living with Purpose workshop on either one, you're really working through all these elements. You're learning how you make decisions through the decision-making style report. And so you're working with a consultant or coach who has obviously done this a number of times with clients, and they will help you step by step, week by week, as the case may be, or if it's in a 2-day workshop. The Think program is just for business owners. It's strategically thinking about your business and personal future, and creating a plan and acting on it. That's typically 4 or 5 sessions where you're getting into some of the fears that you have developed over this transition, learning to counterbalance those, and then coming up with a process where you can get yourself into the whole idea of doing this business and personal transition. Decide is strategically, thinking, deciding what to do with your company. You have to, create a whole plan. And what happens with this is we present 10 different scenarios you should explore about what to do with your business. And we help measure the upsides and downsides. We help you measure how any of those choices might either reflect or negatively impact what you're trying to accomplish, what your transition goals are, what your outcome goals are. And in many ways, I liken this to, you get these 10 choices and then you come up with 1, 2, maybe 3. Then you go to your various business, legal, tax advisors, and so forth, and your business partners, as the case may be, and say, hey, I wasn't sure what I was going to do before, but now I've got these choices. And the analogy I like to make is if you go to major car dealers in the United States today, there's 1,000 cars in this lot. Like, how on earth are you going to figure out what to do? So you have to sort of quickly say, all right, well, I'm not interested in SUV, and I'm not interested in these little 2-seaters, so now I've got these 4-door sedans. All right, and then it's a matter of figuring out, the colors and size and type and speed and whatnot. So that's what the private coaching programs are like. And as I say, they typically take, each one of the programs can take a few sessions, but it's usually a matter of weeks, or in some cases months if you're doing them consecutively. What else? When are you running workshops? We don't happen to have any particular workshop scheduled right now, but they typically are organized through other organizations that we do them. But if there are other advisors who are in our network, they may have them. So if you're interested in attending a workshop in your area, send me a note, and then I will, if it's out of my particular area here in the Boston area, I will try to connect you to one of our other advisors or coaches, and then they can perhaps talk to you about something they might be doing in their area, or if need be, if they want to do something on a private coaching environment, you could do that as well. And not all the coaching has to be done face-to-face. In fact, a lot of it today is done through Skype or GoToMeeting and so forth. It's quite common. So we're getting towards the end of the hour. I don't see any new questions. I'm getting some repeats of the others. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Once again, my name is Paul Cronin, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me here, paul@theplatinayears.com. And this is my partner, Jack. You can call the toll-free number there. And we would love to try to help you on what your transition is. And if you happen to be an advisor and you are wondering if you can learn how to implement some of our programs, the answer is yes. We have a whole training regimen methodology all around there. And as I say, we've trained people in the U.S., Canada, Australia, UK, and South Africa, and we can train you too. So thanks for listening, folks. I hope you have a great day. Bye now.